Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you just after sunrise. It's a beautiful morning. It's a little overcast here, but I always try to greet the sun. It's the provider, the source of life on earth in one, on a physical level and a spiritual level. My topic for today, I'm going to talk about spirit, soul, and ego, and what those are and how they relate. And gosh, I hope I have some good news for you today. Not news, but I hope I have some good information for you that I'm going to do my best to inspire a little bit today. And the reason for that is, the global situation is pretty crazy right now. We're obviously in the middle of a global pandemic that is affecting every human being on this planet at this moment. Whether you are sick, have been sick, know people who have been sick, known people who have died, all of these things. And I'm talking to you from the United States. I know I have listeners all over the world, and that's fantastic. And I greet you and thank you for listening and tuning in to me. Special greetings to my friends in India. But wherever you are, know that you are loved and appreciated. And I do this for you, and I do this to reach out, and I do this to help hopefully bring us together and, maybe bring a little bit of light where things may seem dark. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. In my last podcast, I talked about the divine masculine, divine feminine, and what they look like and how they take place. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today, but in the context of what we might call spiritual development. Spiritual development's a big topic. Obviously, if you walk into any bookstore, there's a huge section of books on spiritual development. There are courses online. There's everything you can think of, every type of practice, meditation, shamanic journeying, everything you can think of out there. So I'm going to start today, and I'm going to give you my definitions of spirit, soul, and ego. And I realized that my definitions may not match up with your definitions or other people's definitions, and that's fine. We sort of have to be okay with that, right? Words are models. And I'm going to talk a lot about models today. But models are not the things, right? If I say the word dog, that is a word that represents the animal dog, but that word is not the dog, right? We say the map is not the territory. It's a pointer. It's a reference to something. And the spiritual realm is primarily invisible, not to everyone, but for most people, as we go around in our daily lives, we experience sort of 3D reality where time flows in one direction only, and effects have causes and all of those things. And so the definitions of things can be sort of loose. And the other thing that happens is that everything we experience on a spiritual level is filtered through our culture. It's filtered through our ego. We're going to talk about what that is today, through our own personal experiences, all of those things. And so there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong if your definitions of things differ from mine. I'm going to give you mine so I can have a common language with you. So when you're listening to me, what I'm talking about. So you're not, hopefully less confused when I use these terms, because I may be using them in a way that you haven't experienced before. And of course, my definitions, they're not necessarily mine. They come from my shamanic practice and were given to me by my teachers and that sort of thing. When I say I'm just saying the ones that I'm using, not things that I have made up. I don't want you to think that I've invented some new system of explaining reality. There's nothing new about what I'm talking about. I have a perspective, but even that is informed by my culture, my teachings, my studies that I've done, the journeys that I've done as a shamanic practitioner. All of those things are, so I don't claim ownership to them when I say my. And that's the difficulty with words, right? In English, when I say this, it could describe ownership, or it could describe, just something I've adopted. So let's talk a little bit about spirit and soul first, and then we'll talk about ego after that. And then I'm going to spend a little time on how to sort of go a little deep, if you're interested, how to go a little deeper into this learning. And so before I get into spirit, soul, and ego, I'm going to talk to you about what I mean when I say the word spiritual, right? This is Speaking Spirit. This is a podcast when I talk about spiritual topics. And what do I mean when I use the word spiritual? To me, spiritual is anything that gives you a connection with something greater than yourself, something beyond your physical self, your ego, that sort of thing. And that's a very broad definition, right? Because for some people, walking in nature might give them a deeper connection. Would I describe that as spiritual? Absolutely. That would be a spiritual experience. Meditation, when you go inside and touch a part of yourself that is connected to the entire universe, absolutely spiritual. If you pray, if you're a religious person and you pray and that gives you a sense of connection to deity, absolutely, that is spiritual. That's a spiritual practice. When I hug my children and I feel this unconditional love for them and from them, absolutely, that is a spiritual moment for me. Lovemaking, sex, can be a very spiritual experience. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly can be if it gives you, again, this sense of greater connection. So that's my take on what the word spiritual means. And I have this theory that the deeper you go into anything, the more spiritual it becomes. And I'll give you a few examples. I have practiced martial arts since I was about 5 or 6 years old. I'm in my late 40s right now, so it's a lot of years. And in the beginning, you learn punches and kicks and, arm bars and all of those things. But the more you go into it, the more spiritual it becomes, the more connected you feel, the more in rhythm you feel, even with your opponent. Even, when you're practicing techniques that may seem, violent, hopefully with practice you become more peaceful and you become, it seems like a contradiction, but it's true. You become more peaceful, you abhor violence, you become softer, you become more connected with energy. When I see somebody who isn't, for example, an amazing basketball player, and they're what we call in the zone, right, where they're just in rhythm and flow with what's going on, that seems like I'm not a great basketball player, but that seems like a very spiritual experience for me. Recently, I was watching a cooking show, and the chef on the show was talking about how for him, cooking was all about finding this moment. And the second he described that, I'm like, oh, he's having a deeply spiritual experience with cooking food, with preparing food. He's got this emotional connection to what he's doing, this spiritual connection. So the deeper you go into anything, the more spiritual it becomes. And when I talk about, in a moment, when I talk about soul and spirit, I'm going to talk about how going deeper into yourself is probably about the most spiritual thing you could do. So let's talk about those. Okay. So again, these are my definitions. And again, when I say my, I mean adopted from my teachers and that sort of thing. And I recognize that some people use these words interchangeably. So some people use spirit and soul to describe the same thing. And some people use spirit and soul with sort of opposite definitions of the way I use them. But I just want to give you these definitions so that, again, we can have a common language so I'm not confusing you by what I'm talking about. So when I say spirit and soul, so in the shamanic world, one of the main practices that we do is called soul retrieval. And this is in response to some sort of trauma that somebody's experienced, or an injury to a limb, or a shock to the system. And, this jives actually really well with modern psychological models of trauma. There's a splitting off. There's part of your soul breaks away. So your soul is this sort of body of spiritual energy that you carry around with you. And it is affected by your life experiences. It reincarnates with you when you go from life to life. And it, can sort of take on wounds and injuries and carry those along. So a lot of the work we do in shamanism is healing those parts, right? Finding, recollecting and reuniting and integrating those parts. And this jives really well with sort of Jungian part psychology, family, internal family systems, therapy, those sort of modern psychological models, right, of this fractionating of the self, the soul. Okay. And, we all have a soul, and it is closely in close contact with our body. So what happens, you have a physical body, you have lots of different bodies, right? You have a physical body, you have a soul body, a spirit body. When your soul body completely leaves, that's when you die, right? That's when your physical body dies. Your soul body does not die, and neither does your spirit. But your soul body can carry sort of baggage, wounds, that sort of thing. It's affected by your life experiences. It gains experience, and it can be wounded. It can be healed. It can be developed. This is what we're talking about when we talk about spiritual development. We're talking about developing the soul or astral body, that non-physical part of you. And so when I talk about spirit, what I'm talking about in Sanskrit, there's the word Atman, which is this like internal dwelling, undying slice of divinity. This is your divine self, the part of you that is absolutely undying, indefilable, does not get wounded, is not affected by life experiences. It is just this divine light that is at the center of you. And there's some really amazing meditational practices that happen. There's one taught by the shamanic teacher Sandra Ingerman called Transfiguration, which is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful practice, and simple and extremely deep. And profound spiritual experiences do not have to be complex or take years of training. Some of them can be extremely simple and experienced by anyone. Why? Because we all have this indwelling spirit this part of ourselves. And this, I hope, is a little bit of light if you're experiencing some of the tumult of the world right now in any sort of way that is painful. To know that there's a part of you that is completely unaffected, that is just perfect love and perfect peace at your center. If you want to visualize this, you could visualize this as just an intense light somewhere in the center of your body, usually in your chest area, just that shines in all different directions at all times, and can never be dimmed, can never be injured or affected. And this is your connection to divinity. So let's talk about your bodies. Let's talk about your different bodies. And so again, all of this comes from a cultural context, right? So if you go back and you look at ancient Egyptian religion, they described all of these soul parts, and they had these, huge system of religion around funerary rites, and this part of the soul did this, and this part of the soul did this, went off, and there's, that whole funerary ritual thing was about their model of, the afterlife and the parts of the soul and that sort of thing, right? And again, this is filtered through their culture. In Norse belief, there's again soul. There's all different parts of the soul, right? There's there's a part of the soul that gives you luck, for example, and it's located. It's like a backpack in your back, and that's recognized in many different cultures. So the way I like to look at it, a metaphor that works really well for me, is that human beings are like an onion, a multi-layered onion. We have so many layers that you can peel back one after another, after another, after another, right? We have a physical body, but when you get beyond, that's a super oversimplification of even our physical presence, right? Because we have, a circulatory system and a skeletal system and a neurological system. And then we have all kinds of biochemistry going on, and we have all of the processes that go on. We have, respiration and cellular energy production and all of that stuff, right? The stuff that goes on just to give us this body that we have in this physical world. And your other bodies, your soul body, your energy body, all of these things are equally complex. So you could study these for many lifetimes and never get to the end of them, which is why we create these super oversimplifications. We say we have a body, we have a mind, we have, we have a spirit, we have a soul. Those are super oversimplifications, but it's necessary so that we can have a conversation about it, so that we can talk about it. Again, I can use the word dog, but which represents, it's a pointer to the animal dog, but I can't, I could spend the rest of my life describing everything that makes up a dog, from, behavior to history to how their body, I could go into veterinary science, all of those things. So just an oversimplification. We have all of these bodies, and I view them as these overlapping layers, and they really blend into each other, right? So, for example, we know that humans have an energy body. Okay, this is how a lot of energy healing works, how a lot of acupuncture or Reiki or any of those things work on a level of the human energy system. The human energy body is close to, overlaps with, interacts with the physical body. Very close, very, very closely. And they overlap in such a way that it's almost impossible to really pull them apart and differentiate them, right? So some of the meridians, some of the acupuncture meridians closely follow, the nervous system, and some do not. And so trying to separate those out is a little bit, it's necessary if you're studying studying something like acupuncture to think of them as separate things, but they're really not. Okay. And the same is true for the soul body, right? You have the soul body, which is a little bit removed from the energy body. It's a little bit further inside that onion, right? But they overlap, they interact, and they can affect the physical body. So a lot of shamanic healing works on the level of the soul body. So we've talked about soul retrieval. There are many other practices that shamans do all over the world that affect the soul body, and that can provide a template for physical healing, a template for mental healing, a template for healing. Some of that comes through the energy body, some of it does not. Again, we could study this forever and not get to the bottom of it. And to me, that's a really cool thing to think about, how amazing we are as human incarnations, how lucky we are to have incarnated in a physical body. And I realize some religious systems say that that's a terrible thing to have to incarnate, because we have to experience pain and loss and suffering and all of those things. And I get that. And we do. Like, having a body it's not a walk in the park, right? It's not all pleasure. It is certainly the ability to experience pleasure and pain and all of those things. And those dualities exist in the human body. But we're lucky because we do get to interact on this plane. We do get to do things that develop our soul body, that develop our astral body, that develop our mind, that develop these things. So that's my take anyway. And I promised I was going to talk about ego, and I will talk about ego a little bit. And ego is one of those things, at least in the U.S., it's a little bit of a dirty word, in that if you describe somebody as having a big ego, for example, that is not a compliment, right? We say, check out that guy's ego, meaning that they have an inflated sense of self, that they think very highly of themselves and perhaps that this is a judgment about somebody not showing humility. And humility is humility is a wonderful trait to have. So what are we talking about when we talk about ego? So egoism is a mental construct. So it takes place it's not its own body in my take. It is simply your sense of who you are. It's your sense of I, and all of the sort of complex things that that comes with, right? So when I think of myself, my name is John, something my parents gave me when I was born. That's a part of, but something that I happen to, like, if somebody says John, I'm going to turn around, right? Because I identify with that. That's my name. That's one part of my ego. But I'm also a dad. That's a concept that I have about myself. So it's about your self-concept. It's about who and how you identify. Okay. So we can develop problems with our ego, right? We can develop problems. One problem is we can develop hubris, right? We can develop this inflated sense of self. And that certainly can happen with some types of spiritual development. And so the astral body, the soul body, has this sort of hubris effect on the ego, because it does affect the mental body, certainly. It affects our consciousness. And I certainly have known people who consider themselves ascended or above others or beyond, beyond flaw and that sort of thing. And that is a real trap. That is a super serious, terrible trap to fall into in spiritual development. If you ever think that your work is done, you are probably wrong. You are most likely wrong. Unless you are the Buddha or are actually, some sort of enlightened master. The problem is that people think they are, and they aren't. And they might have developed amazing spiritual abilities. We think about, I think about a Buddhist teacher that I studied with decades ago who was considered by some of his students enlightened and had all kinds of special abilities and things like that. And, he wound up taking his own life later, which is both tragic, but also an indicator that he hadn't done the work that was necessary to clean up the shadow parts, which I talked about in my first podcast on darkness and light being two sides of the same coin. The shadow work is super important, and if you don't do it, it will come back and bite you. You have to do that. You're gonna come back again and again and again, and have to work on the same thing over and over again. So that can definitely happen, and that's a problem that can happen with ego. And this is where I hope there's a little bit of light pouring in here into what I'm talking about, not just warnings. What can happen, though, is you do the work. So ego is about identification, right? It's about identifying who am I, right? You can ask, in fact, you can use that as a mantra. Who or what am I could be a mantra that you repeat. And the Indian saint Ramana Maharshi, that was his mantra. That's what he taught his students to repeat over and over again, to get at the core of the self, this feeling of being unified with divinity, with being unified with the source. And that's where you can go with, I think, almost any spiritual practice that helps you turn inside. And in my last podcast, I talked about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And so, and again, there's no one is better than the other. They are co-equal as long as they are treated as such, as long as they aren't misinterpreted or as long as there's not power over, right? There's power with. Okay. So divine masculine spiritual practices are the things that we do outwardly, such as making offerings, praying to a deity, setting up an altar, all of those things are these sort of outward expressions of spirituality, divinity, and they are absolutely valid. And they are, prayer, chanting, anything that comes from within to without. Equally valid is the turning inside, right? Remember I said the more you go inside something, the more spiritual it becomes, and that includes yourself. The deeper you go into yourself and you reach that point where you identify, this is where the ego comes into place, right? The ego is a tool that, when used correctly, allows you to identify more and more with that divine part of yourself. And that is the divine feminine part of spiritual development. And hey, you don't have to choose just one avenue. You can do both things. You can make offerings and you can meditate and turn inside. You can pray to a deity and you can take up shamanic journeying and, get more insight by turning into the inner realms. You can do both at the same time, and it's a very, very powerful combination, this divine masculine and divine feminine practices, the outward practices, the inward practices. And if you separate them out too much, if you focus on one area a little too much, they can become out of balance, right? I mean, we all know, I've lots of friends who grew up in a religion and may even go to church every week and don't actually really believe or practice. It's a thing that they do. It's this, I went to church every week as a child and I still go to church, but I don't really practice and I don't really believe, which to me is unfortunate and a missed opportunity, right? Either to dive deeper into that religion or to find one that you do believe in and can practice both externally and internally, right? There's not much spiritual development going on there, unfortunately. This is not a judgment. You're free to do whatever you want. I just see it as a missed opportunity. It makes me a little bit sad. Although, I'm sure there's a benefit from that. I'm sure people who do that are able to make some kind of connection, at least on a social level. And ritual is important. Ritual is any sort of symbolic action that we take, right? And ritual is important, even on a psychological level. We actually, in the Western world, I think are missing a lot of ritual that exists in other places. We strip that out of our daily lives a little too much, in my opinion. So, and a lot of people are starting to bring that back. A lot of people are starting to explore more here. But we became, we went through the Industrial Revolution, and we spent a lot of time working and focused really on day-to-day physical survival stuff. And it's an interesting note. I realize this is a complete tangent, but it's an interesting note that studies show that, in previous times, pre-Industrial Revolution, even during hunter-gatherer times, people had more free time, right? They weren't hunting and gathering all day, 8 hours a day, every day. They had more free time to do things like develop art and music and religion and culture and, build giant stone monuments, places and things like that. They had the cycles to do that. We don't in this modern world, because we spend a third of our time sleeping, a third of our time working, and the other third of the time, usually, hopefully some of that, resting, relaxing, going inside, doing development, but it's a very limited window for that sort of activity, right? And we have all of the other things we have to do. We have to go shopping and feed the kids and, just day-to-day life stuff, clean the house. And so it becomes a little bit out of balance. So when you do have the opportunity, it's important. It's an important part of spiritual hygiene. It's as important to me as brushing your teeth, which is very important, to spend some time daily in spiritual reflection, spiritual practice, any of those things. So with that, I'm going to bring this podcast to a close. We talked a little bit about what I mean by spirit, soul, and ego. I hope that you learned something. I hope that I can, maybe give you a little push to spend a little more time turning inside, finding that divine part of yourself. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your life experience is. It's a real beautiful thing to me that every single individual on this planet, and that includes people who no longer have bodies, and may still be around, have that divine spark. They have that divine aspect, that divine nature, that they are absolutely connected to the unity that is the universe. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. If you can get any sort of experience of that, it will change you. It will change you for the better. So if you would like more information about me or what I do or this podcast, or if you're listening to this somehow and don't have access to previous episodes, you can go to my website, which is mainshaman.com. That's MAINESHAMAN.com. Again, it's Maine like the state, because that's where I live. Shaman, SHAMAN.com. In March, I am co-teaching an introduction to shamanic journeying class online. You can find more information about that on my website. And I'm co-teaching that with 3 other really amazing shamanic teachers. And we're doing this because we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and I am not teaching in person at this time. And so this is a good opportunity if you have ever wanted to learn about shamanic journeying, to do that. And it will take place over a weekend at the end of March. And again, there's more information on my website. You can check that out. If you have, you can contact me through there if you have questions or suggestions for podcast topics. Gosh, I would love that. I would love to make this more about what you want to hear about, and or guests. I am fully intending on having guests, so it's not just you listening to the sound of my voice and me listening to the sound of my voice in the future. I want to thank you so much for listening. It's very important to me right now to be reaching out to other people in any way that I can. And I do love you, and I don't care who you are. And that may sound a little weird, but if people can, there's a saying that if people can hate people they have never even met, then I can choose to love people I have never met. And just know that you are loved, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. And I am going to be a part of that. I'm going to be a part of the ones who are loving in this crazy world, and will bring hopefully some healing and sanity to the world as it's being shaken up. With that, I will leave you. Have a blessed day.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.